Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Evil. Fantastic season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I've said it time and time again. This show is so wild and it is so weird, and it's just getting wilder and weirder and more scandalous as it's going on. I think it's so crazy to think about. The fact is, season 1 being on CBS was kind of wild to me because I was like, how are you putting this on what I think would be considered primetime television? It just seemed like it'd be like having something like that. You'd expect it on like an HBO or a Showtime to me. And now I feel like now that it's on Paramount Plus, the floodgates are open. It's like, we're going to do whatever we want to. You thought season 1 was balls to the wall. Season 2 was balls to the wall on Paramount Plus because they knocked it up a lane. I think this season, just from what I remember of the trailer, it's going to be, this episode alone just sets the tone of just like, expect things to get even wilder, even crazier. You didn't think that was possible? Well, we're going to prove you wrong. I'm so excited. It's this show. It's like, I love it when it's around, but I forget just how much I love it until it comes back around. I'm like, ooh, it's like sliding right back in. It's like The Boys. I forget how much I love The Boys until the new episodes start airing. I'm like, oh yeah, I love this. Same thing for Evil. Picking up where season 2's finale left off, Kristen and David, I'm like, ooh, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. And I was like, whoa, they're doing their thing. And then David stops the moment he sees the burn marks on her belly from the crosses last season. And then David just stops because for him, I think it was a reminder of like, right, she's kind of, maybe he kind of feels like, right, I'm taking advantage of someone. I just, gave her took her confession and, God forgives you. So I just did that whole rigmarole. Like, maybe for him, it feels like it made him kind of snap back to reality of like, oh, this is what Kristen's been going through. She's been struggling. And it's like, if we do anything, I'd be crossing a boundary, but also I'll be taking advantage of her. So he's like, no, let's not do this. She's like, I'm sorry. I'm like, wow. And then she came back in afterwards. It's like, right, we'll do it this once and we'll never talk about it again. And they do it. I'm like, yo, that's wild. So, like, the main case was happening and Kristen wasn't there at first. I was like, yeah, it's probably going to be a little awkward around each other. But once again, they said, let's do it once and we'll never talk about it again. But I figured things would still be kind of awkward between them. Obviously, she was looking after her kids and everything anyway, which that's the whole thing we'll get to in a second. But I do love the overarching element to this episode being, right, they're trying to run these experiments to see the weight of the soul. They're trying to get people who are near death, weigh them before death, and account for stuff like, I guess, like loss of like liquids and stuff like that, like after you die, because you do like let go of your bowels and stuff like that. I think stuff like that is like, right, the doctor in charge of it, Dr. Swan, was saying that they kind of accounted for that stuff. Obviously, because Ben's being, the reluctant, realist, he's the, science guy of like, right, there's a scientific explanation for it. So initially the person they're bringing in is a guy named Frank, who had talked a little bit about like, oh, like, forgive me, I have sinned. I've been having lustful thoughts. And interesting time for that conversation to come up, considering everything, David and Kristen did. So I thought that was kind of interesting timing. But you could tell, like, David kind of felt a little awkward around and he kept looking back to the Monsignor. He's like, no, it's okay. God will look after you and protect you. So they put Frank in the machine, and he does die. And they notice, like, oh, my God, he has basically what was it? Specifically, it was like 23.66 grams, I think, of something like that, what left him. And then all of a sudden, he came back and everything, he seemed okay. In fact, he seemed healthier, which that actor, I've seen him in so many things. He's just he's one of those actors I never know his name, but I will see him in so many different things. But he comes back. I think his character's name's Frank, right? It's like, comes back, he's healthier than ever. But when they weighed him again, he was still missing that 23 grams, and everyone's like, what happened? And at first they're like, did he come back without a soul? But it just seemed like the way he was acting, it's like, but the fact is, the first thing he did was kiss the Monsignor, and you're like, oh. And that kind of plays into the awkwardness later on, because you could tell there's this look on Kristen's face when they're talking to the Monsignor, and the Monsignor was like, oh, like, no, we gotta find someone else to kind of test this out, because they end up bringing in a Sister Gertrude later on to test it out. But you could tell, like, Kristen kind of had that feeling of, like, oh, she had a feeling of what's going on there. She's telling Monsignor's like, oh, should go see Frank. He wants to see you. He's like, I'll see him, after he's rested up a bit. And it's like, because he's awkward around it. Because obviously, being a priest, you take a vow of celibacy. But part of me wonders, is like, I mean, it just depends. I don't know how priests handle, like, homosexuality. Like, in general, where Christians kind of stand with homosexuality. Not everyone, that's me generalizing, because even then, people who are Christian still are like, no, like, they recognize it, and have no issue with anyone being gay. Some people in Christianity, I mean, people within some religions will, but it's not always the whole. There are people, it's like, right, it's nuance. It's like, I can have my faith and still, like, not agree with everything that they might frown upon homosexuality. But it's like, yeah, there's plenty of Christians who are like, no, like, they support the LGBTQ, what's it, TIA. I'm sorry, I always, like, mess up the other initials. But they support that community. So, but I don't know how that translates over to being a priest, So that's why I'm wondering, did Frank and Monsignor have their past and then they took their vow of celibacy? Like, is it very similar, almost like David and Kristen? Is it something like that? But, especially because he had said that what he saw was like these hands reaching out to him and he was going towards him, but they felt so far away. But then the Monsignor, touching his back and smiling at him made him decide to come. He's like, I came back for him. So I guess it was almost like love kind of drew him back, because he was kind of letting go of everything that was kind of holding him back. He was like, yeah, I'm saying all the things I never would have said before. And even the Monsignor's like, yeah, he never acted like this before, that he was very rigid and he was very, because it's like, right, he had the burden of, I guess, once again, you can't be, I mean, maybe it's frowned upon. I don't know if that's ever, I don't think I've ever, I mean, I'm not saying there isn't, but I've never heard of a situation like, right, you being a priest. I mean, if not even just gay, even bi, I don't know. Once again, not saying it doesn't happen, but it's just like, I don't know how the church in general would feel about that. You'd assume that, right, homosexuality, just someone being bi in general, wouldn't be an issue with every other issue that the church has going on. So it's like, right, that shouldn't be an issue at all, especially because you've got major issues, so that's a whole conversation in itself. So I thought that was interesting. And like I said, the Monsignor was just kind of avoiding Frank. I was actually really sad that in the end, it's like, right, they both agreed to, that Frank would go to a different parish, just because neither one of them knows what will happen if they're around each other. Like, either, like, the Monsignor's probably afraid, like, he'll give in to his, once, especially because, like, it might not just be like, oh, Frank's the only one feeling something, and if something happens, like, would the Monsignor feel like, oh, like, well, for one, they have to take their vow of celibacy, and it's very important to them, so of course, that's also something too. So I think there's layers upon layers of the complications there, and you can tell it made Kristen kind of feel bad, because it's like, right, her and David are kind of caught in a very similar dynamic, so it's probably a thing of like, right, like, will it eventually go to the point that I would have to, like, would David end up transferring to a different parish so we wouldn't end up working together? I think maybe that's something she's going to be thinking about. Especially because Kurt gave her the idea to basically bring David home to, like, have dinner with the family, because that way we get past the awkwardness of it all and just kind of normalize their relationship to some extent. Because I don't think David and Andy have ever been in the same scene together, have they? Because she's still kind of, like, compartmentalizing those parts of her lives. Because, like, obviously, like, her lives have blurred over because the kids have been around Ben and they like Ben. I'm trying to think, have they been around David much? I don't think all of them have. Maybe? I know Ben is the one they've mainly been around. I don't know if I can't really think off the top of my head. Do correct me in the comments down below if they've all ever really been around David. But like I said, that whole separation of both of our lives, they're probably going to have to start mingling a little bit more, like both sides. Like, oh, the work you do with the church, Ben and David. It'd be kind of neat if you brought Ben along too. So that'd be an interesting dinner. We'll see what that ends up being in the future. But speaking of Andy's back, and he's back permanently. He's found someone who's going to buy the business, which you're like, okay, that's definitely going to be somebody connected to Leland in some shape or form. It's going to definitely end up being a whole thing, some shape or form. So What exactly, we'll ultimately have to wait and see, but it's like, you get the inkling, because I think he even said whoever it is trying to pay cash. You're like, that seems super suspicious. But I love that the moment he comes back, he goes to Cheryl's room, and there's like a demon. I don't know if that's supposed to almost be like a paralysis demon, or just probably just a straight up demon. And I'm like, cool, so Andy's seeing it now. Granted, that's connected to Cheryl, but still, it's like, right. So we had the whole George thing all of season 1 with Kristen. Then like what I kept being referring to as a succubus in season 2, the one that was going after Ben, but also Kurt finally saw, I want to say it was George, wasn't it? He finally saw George last season as well. So there's that. And now David's being haunted by maybe a succubus in her own right too. Because the moment Kristen came back, she's like, oh, I want you. It's like, oh my God. It's like, oh, the way you fucked me. We came at the same time. I'm like, yo, no holds bar, right? And then her tongue was forked. I was like, oh, cool. That's not Kristen. I was like, that's interesting. And then like when David talks to her later on, it's like, right, about that. She's like, no, I went home. He's like, the night of your confession. She's like, yeah, I went home. And it's like, it's a good thing we didn't do anything. He's like, wait, we didn't do it? We had sex. And she's like, what? I don't know what you're talking about, David. He's like, yeah, it must have been my mind. It's like, so that person he was having sex with that night of the confession that came back into the room, that wasn't Kristen. It was this demon kind of getting inside of his head. So, because I don't think Ben saw the succubus or whatever post, like when David came to help him inside of that dream. Like, I don't think he's seen it since. So now it's come following David, and now it's like, right, it's like, right, this is just doing all the forbidden things you want. It's doing its thing, and then all of a sudden he looks and sees Sister Gertrude, because we find out that Sister Gertrude, when she died, she actually gained, was it 36 grams? So David's theory is, instead of, like, maybe souls don't weigh anything, but demons do, so that Frank lost a demon that was latched to him the moment the experiment happened again before she died. Sister Gertrude had a demon latched on to it, so maybe that's a demon, like, now it's either she's personification, like, oh, the demon took her form because that was the last form, and now it's projecting this version of his desires of Kristen. I mean, I'm sure there's also, like, right, the forked tongue, like a snake, and it's supposed to be like, oh yeah, like the snake that gives into your desires and stuff like that, I guess that's supposed to be like the metaphor and analogy that's kind of going for. I wonder, is that supposed to mean like, well, because the dream happened before Frank died, so like that first Kristen, but the second time she visited was after Frank, and now the third time is post Sister Gertrude. So you're like, I don't know. The fact is that she's standing in the corner too. You're like, maybe that's just like the demon that's with her there watching this particular. Once again, is it a demon? Like, is it that succubus from that was messing with Ben, just in the form of Kristen? Because they love going after David, because the point is to kind of break David more so than anyone. The whole point too was like to attack those around him, Ben and Kristen, to corrupt them to get to David. And it's like, well, now they found the pathway to David, because I think Kristen and him doing their thing kind of made that possible. It kind of, even though they didn't go all the way, it's once again that desire, the awkward, because even Kristen's like, yeah, like, let's not be awkward around each other, and then she immediately kind of almost like runs away from the conversation. It's like, yeah, let's not be awkward. Oh yeah, but it's still super awkward. Then speaking of Kurt, that's the whole Sister Andrea situation. I love that, because she was like, because he kept trying to deny the demon situation, where he was like, oh, you're a fucking demon or something. She kicked him, and basically she was saying it's not going to come down to something. She's saying is basically when you die is going to come down to what you believe, and at the end that demon is going to come visit you, so it's basically kind of no escaping it. So I don't know whether she's kind of saying you're fucked, or she's just saying more like, yeah, better come to terms with the fact is that it really was a demon, and kind of come to terms with like you. And even the fact is, when she left, she's like, oh, you're Kristen that works with David. It's like, right. It's like, right, you are baptized. And you turned away from her. She's like, is that what David said? And she's like, no. Because you could tell, like, Sister Andrea, like, I love how, like, she's like, nah, she speaks her mind. She's not gonna, like, she never holds her tongue. The fact is that she's kind of, I think she's worried about Kristen being a bad influence on David. It's like, right, David's, she's like setting him up to be this ultimate champion in a battle against good versus evil. And she sees what role Leland's playing and trying to dilute that and swayed him. And I think she kind of looks at Kristen like that. She's just, you definitely, I think this is their first, I guess this is their first interaction, which is kind of wild to think about it. I don't know if, like, have her been interacted? I'm trying to remember now off the top of my head. I know, like, most of her scenes have always been, well, David and Leland. So, speaking of Leland, I love that he was there at the meeting earlier in the episode, and Kristen came in, smiled, she's like, hi. I'm like, I love it when Kristen gets super, like, cheeky, and it's just kind of like, oh yeah, I came with a restraining order. Oh, here's a picture my daughter took of him touching my daughter. It's like, oh, good thing the church doesn't have a history with older men and young children. I'm like, boom, Kristen coming in with the body shots. Yo, because she got all the kids together, and it's like, right, we need to join together. Leland's evil, so let's keep an eye out and try and take him down. Like, if anything comes up, you guys call me immediately. And their Otis hooked her up with that photo. And it's like, yo. I even love later on, he's up there being like, oh yeah, like, they're investigating it. But I explained the context of the principal wanted me to talk to Alexis. And it's like, okay, so, and he looks at Kristen and is like, oh, do you want to hit me? And she's like, would you like that? And he's just kind of, huh. And his phone is buzzing because I love what the kids do. First, the moment Alexis played that game, I'm like, oh god, we're coming back to a demented game. Made me immediately go back to like season 1. I was like, oh god, we're going down this route again. And the moment the pig showed up with the glass, I was like, it has to be Leland, right? And I love that the youngest, she comes over and she's like, oh, what are you doing? It's like, Leland, talking to Leland. And it's like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, he's trying to pretend to be like a little girl. I was like, yo, you see through it? The fact that she also chose a lizard, I was like, okay, yeah, the tail and everything from last season, right. But she saw through it, and she's like, yeah, he makes it super odd. For one, he doesn't talk like a girl, and he keeps asking stuff about mom, so I'm trying to trick him into pretending like I'm tricked. And then I love, eventually, they all join in. And it's like, because she was telling her youngest sister, like, right, he doesn't, how rude, because he doesn't want to talk to me. He's like, well, pretend that you have cancer and you're dying. And then, like, later on, because he's checking his phone, and they're, like, messaging him all the time, because all 4 of them are playing now. I'm like, you think, that's the thing, Leland, you think you're so evil and bad, you can't defeat children. Children are the most evil thing in existence. But yeah, they're trolling the ever-living shit out of him, and I love it. They're like, cool, let's ask him a question at the same time. 3, and just his phone is blowing up to the point later on, he throws it down, he's like, damn children? That's your kryptonite. You're trying to use them against their mom, and they literally clap back at your ass. I love it so much. It's like, how bad does that make you feel? You got beat by some children. Every villain in anything will be like, yeah, that's typically how that goes. So I thought that was an interesting development. Circling back to Andy, I love the whole thing of him and Cheryl going. He's like, yeah, so Cheryl, I'm gonna need you to move out. Get the fuck out of my house. And I love that back and forth between them. And she's basically like, all right, she's basically like, yo, you want to go to war, Andy? We can go to war. Because you haven't been much of. He's like, no, does it look like anything you're saying is bothering me? Get the fuck out. And so I'm like, oh boy. And then she's like, Eddie, my Eddie, help me get rid of that piece of motherfucking shit. I was like, yo! Bringing the Eddies back into it, it's interesting. But also the fact is that, it's like, oh, that's going to be an issue. Andy and Cheryl, that's going to be an interesting through line. Because even Andy was like, I need your mom to move out. And she's like, I know. Because even she knows her mom's kind of wild. And also knows, like, the bad blood between Andy and, Cheryl. She's trying to, I think, get the household back in order. But still, you're like, man. Then Andy finding that jar under the bed, getting rid of it, and you're like, and he's like splitting it up with a plunger when the head pops out. He's like, what the fuck? Flushes it down the toilet. You're like, okay, that's going to create some bad juju, and that's going to come back in some shape or form. So, once again, show just continues to be wild. I love that this was just how our opening to the season. Also, I didn't talk about it, but I love that the opening credits has changed like that. Because I think, if I remember correctly, you rarely got the full-blown opening credits for season 1 and season 2. Maybe you did, I'm not remembering correctly. I know there were some episodes you did, some episodes you didn't. But also they've completely changed it, keeping that same creepy motif element to it, but still. I like the whole sequence. We probably won't get it every episode. It'll probably only be some of the episodes. You'd think they'd probably show it off more, considering the fact is that it's a new one, but we'll see whether that ends up being the case or not. I love we're still doing the pop-up book element. I'm like, oh, I love that little motif that they're doing. I love that we're continuing that, so I'm so excited to see where this season ends up taking us, because a lot of stuff was like, once again, out of context when I saw the trailer, and it's been a little while, so I actually don't remember much from the trailer, which I'm really happy about. I kind of didn't want to watch the trailer, but I was like, I need to know. But luckily I don't remember much from the trailer, so I think a lot of this season is still going to end up being quite a surprise. Some stuff will probably come back to me as the season progresses, but I'm so excited to have Evil back. Obviously, at the end of the episodes, it says, in loving memory of Peter Scolari. He played Father Thomas, season 1 and season 2. He was in a little bit of season 1, but I think he was mainly in season 2, if I remember correctly. I don't know, because I know he passed away a couple months ago. Because I remember, I didn't know it until like a Fat Man Beyond episode from a couple weeks back when Kevin and Mark were talking about him. I was like, oh man, I didn't know he had passed. I think he was sick. So I don't know if he filmed anything. Like I said, that was a couple months ago, so I don't know, like maybe he was too sick to film anything. I don't know if maybe he's going to be in a little bit of this season or not, maybe not at all because of that. Either way. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good